don't seem terribly disappointed.
Okay, are you ready?
I think so. Are we on? Can you hear us? No. You're on. Now can you hear us?
I think that's worth. Let there be light. Right.
Are you, excuse me, are you each seated comfortably? You're not yet. I need to be sure you're on screen.
I'm as comfortable as I'm gonna get.
Well, you'll just, I don't know, you'll have to put up with that, I guess. Yeah?
Let's try it. It's a little loud.
Please do not move more than about an inch. The two of you will fall off. Okay?
More than an inch. Okay.
Yeah, okay? To the outside.
Do we need to get somebody to adjust these?
I don't know, let's try
Can you
it.
hear us? Yes?
I think it's flat.
How's that? Kathy, in the back. Can you hear us, Kathy? Okay.
Okay.
Kathy can hear us. We're okay.
Can you turn it down a little bit?
If you can't hear me, you probably wouldn't be fortunate.
Mine's working, right? All right, let's jump in. I wanted to start with a broad image, and we can get to some particulars as we go. Let's start with this. Give us a sense of what do we look like as along the Wasatch Front? What do we look like as a community in 2050? What do we look like?
Well, I think there are probably a number of answers to that, and the easy answer is it depends on what we do today. But I think we can all look at some trends that might give us a sense for where we're going. Utah continues to be one of the fastest growing states in the country. I think right now we're the second fastest. And we can look at that as a real positive. It reflects the fact that we've got economic opportunity, quality of life that ranks very high, that people can come here and enjoy the outdoors. It's generally affordable. But we all can see examples around the West, around the country, places that maybe haven't thought ahead, maybe haven't done it right. And you can foresee that if we don't do things in a smarter way, we can see this problem. It creates worse air pollution, we're using our water, don't have the outdoor experiences that we hope for, etc.
How many more people?
The projection is that by 2050, I think we'll have about 2.5 million more people.
2.5 million more people along the
So if you
Wasatch.
think about that, that means we need to generate over 1 million new jobs. We've got to provide housing for these people, transportation, and that's a big challenge.
So start from one end of the Wasatch Front to the other. How much of that land that's now open won't be in 2050?
Go ahead.
Well, we only have a limited amount of undeveloped land now on the Wasatch Front. And as Alan was talking about, with the near doubling of the population, we're anticipating about 300 square miles of land that's now not developed. Either it's open space or green space, some of the area that we love so much, one of the things that makes living here so wonderful, and prime agricultural land would be taken up. But the reality, Doug, is even if we absorb all of that land, if we continue sort of standard patterns of development, there is not enough room for everybody to live in large lot, single-family homes, and there's not enough area to put all the homes and the roads in to accommodate the population that's coming. So
Even if we take all of that land, and even if we plan properly, we've got to come up with some other options.
well, that's part of planning properly.
I think it's
Is it me?
Just turn the switches on and off, and I'll see if I can do that.
okay. I mean, I'll move away from there. I can't move more than an inch.
Face out. Okay.
Are you looking at each
Can
other?
I, Doug, before you opened, you opened with a question about what are we going to look like in 2050.
Right.
And I think Alan identified the single greatest issue, which is how fast the population is going to grow. But we're not just growing, we're also changing as a community. Right? This is happening across the country. We are diversifying. And some people have this tendency to think, well, that's not Utah, right? And while we may today be less diverse than the average in the country, if you go to a kindergarten classroom in Salt Lake County, you will see the future for Utah. There are 102 languages being spoken at homes around Utah. 102, and that's through the school district, they tell us that. Salt Lake County, by 2050, will have a majority-minority population. So one of the things we have to contemplate is not just the fact that we're growing, but we are changing and becoming much more diverse, which is a good thing.
I want to ask you about your Utah, your future, which is this, as you know, this effort to establish what you call a common vision for Utah by 2050. What does that mean, common vision? Are we going to have to come to some kind of consensus? Or are we going to have to, what does it mean to find a common vision in a diverse?
Let me say that I think if we're going to make changes and get where we want to be, it needs to be generally a common vision. In other words, we have to have a general agreement about the direction we're heading. Otherwise, there's going to be division and we won't be able to get the political will necessary to make the changes to get where we need to be. Now,
what does that mean? I mean,
let me tell you.
Yeah, okay.
I'm very comfortable that we can get there. What it means is we're exploring the values of the people of Utah. This isn't a process that's starting from scratch. In the mid-90s, we had a challenge with growth. We looked at many of the issues we're facing today, and we said, we've got to do something. And Envision Utah came along with support from the governor, and the business community, and others, and developed, with the involvement of 20,000 people, a quality growth strategy to guide where we go in the future. The foundation of that was a value study, a very sophisticated process to understand what people care about and what drives their decision making. And I'll just cut to the chase. What we found was that regardless of politics, religion, ethnic background, economic background, the values of the people of Utah were the same. And the direction that they wanted to head was pretty much the same. I'm confident we're going to find that today. As we talk to people and have started this process, the vision they have for 2050 is pretty similar. We've got cleaner air. We've got water that we need for economic development, but also in the streams. We have a transportation system that allows us to get where we need to be. We have affordable housing. And I'll talk a little bit later about the progress we've made in that regard. But we just went through an exercise last week to start the next round of this value study. And I think that's going to give us some of those touch points that will help us find it.
I wanted to drill down on this idea of, because that's such a broad term of values, and that they all share values. So let me be more specific. One of the things that we had been talking about before all of this was that it's hard to take a model from another place and transplant it here or any place because the culture, the community is so distinct. And that's, I'm sure, true here, of course, as well. So how do you describe this place broadly? What is it about Utah? What's our culture? What's the thing that we have to take into account when we think about our unique, and there's the good and there's probably not so good. Let's start with the good. What are the things that how do you describe this place that's unique?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you, my wife and I, Tracy, she's over there. My wife and I moved here about 4 years ago, and we had vacationed here, and so we all know there's great skiing and natural beauty, and that's perhaps one of the most obvious things that's so great about this place is the geographic setting. But I will admit that before moving here, I think I harbored some of the stereotypical notions about what Utah is, right? When people outside Utah think about who lives here, this may not be perfectly politically correct, but who lives here? Mormons and ski bums, right? That's the notion about what makes up this place. And obviously it's more complicated than that. But there is a fair degree of truth to that, right? The predominant cultural groupings here are the LDS community
and a lot of folks who have come here because of the great natural beauty that we enjoy. Okay, so politically you might think those groups are so distinct from each other, but they share something incredibly important, which is a love for this place, right? So for the LDS community, this is Zion, right? This is the Holy Land, and we must work to preserve it, not just for us, but for our children and our grandchildren. Similarly, the folks that are so interested in the outdoors, this also is a wonderful place, a special place that has to be preserved. So we're pioneers and immigrants coming together. So culturally, that is one of the things that makes me so optimistic about our ability to preserve and even enhance the things that we love so much about Utah, is we all care about it, which enables us to do these things like Your Utah, Your Future, or Wasatch Choice 2040. Bring people together who have different perspectives, but towards common goals of working together. That's essential to our culture.
But how does that play out ideologically? It's one thing to say, yes, we all love this place, but then it's another thing to say that if you're of a certain ideological perspective, it could be said you have a natural mistrust of planning, of being told what to do. You have a sense, kind of obsessive sense about private property and free will. Those are very particular to this place. It's reflected in our legislative leadership, I think that's fair to say as well. So those are direct conflicts. Not everyone's on the same page ideologically on those things, and that's a major obstacle to making planning decisions, it seems. So how do you get beyond that?
It is. Well, it's a great question. And the fact is that we have a great history of planning. And you recognize that on July 21st of 1847, the Advance Party came in and started laying out the community based on the Plat of Zion that Joseph Smith had developed. And it became a model for 500 communities around the western United States. Day 4, after the Brigham Young arrived, they set up a planning commission. So we had this early background. I think it was lost. And we kind of went the way of most metropolitan areas. Yeah, you've identified some challenges. But I think one of the common values that we've seen is this sense of love of family and a desire to keep family and friends together. And that plays out across the spectrum. So when we start thinking about the future, in the minds of Utahns, they say, what do I have to do to make sure that this place is special for my kids and grandkids so they'll have the option and the desire to stay here? I think that's part of it. The other thing is, we've stayed away from regulation, knowing that there's been pushback on that. But education has been really powerful. When Envision Utah started.
But are you saying, forgive me, regulation is crucial to moving forward?
No. That'll be part of it.
Yeah.
But let me just talk about what's happened over the last 15 years as an example of where we're going. We went through this process, educated the public, presented scenarios, diverse options of how we could grow, helping people get an understanding of the costs and benefits of different options. And we had clear direction on where we should head. That was compelling to elected officials. In fact, the University of Utah, 5 years later, did a study of every metropolitan area, every town and city in the region, and found that at that time, 98% had changed their ordinances to reflect the quality growth strategy. And it's been more since then. Now, it's not wholly adopted, but the principles, because of this public tidal wave of opinion, changed regulation on the ground. And that's led to a freeing up of the market to develop more compactly, more efficiently.
So you're saying there's a way to make this happen in a free market, and that will assuage the concerns on the right, ideologically.
There'll be some of each. I think we'll start with that, but there are going to be needed regulations, no question.
Because that's a big question. We'll come back to that.
Let me pick up on the political. I mean, you identify something that's important. Most people, but Utahns certainly are reluctant to have people telling them what to do from Washington or from the state capitol, right? And when I moved here, so I came here from Chicago, and Chicago's different than Utah in a variety of ways, okay? And Rebecca and Patrice will appreciate this. It's a little story. I got here, I was in it with a group of people and we were talking about some of these issues. And I had a state legislator, who will go unnamed, literally poke me in the chest and say, don't try to make Utah like Chicago. To which my reaction is, I have no interest in doing that, right? We have to find approaches that work for Utah, but crucially, there is no one-size-fits-all approach, okay? If in western Weber County, there are rural areas and horse properties, and that is very different than what happens in downtown Salt Lake City. We are not saying that there's one size fits all. We are not saying, well, everybody has to live in a walkable, mixed-use community and ride the train. But with all the growth that's coming, if we can create more opportunity for growth to occur in centers, in Salt Lake City or Ogden, along the front runner, transit-oriented development around front runner, then that creates the opportunity to preserve the character of existing suburban or even rural communities. So in other words, you can have folks have very different political ideas and very different ideas for what kind of neighborhood or community they want to live in, who from a broader regional perspective can share a view for how we're going to grow. Because, great, you want to live in a condo in downtown Salt Lake, you do that, and that's for you. And I'm going to stay on my farm in a rural area. And if we work together from a regional perspective, both of those things can be accommodated.
Well, let me just make one more point. If you look at what people want, they tell us they want through market surveys and other things. The projection is that about a third of people between now and 2040 will want to live in walkable, mixed-use, transit-accessible communities. We're nowhere near providing that. So the market is going to be a powerful force in getting us to solve some of these problems.
Because there's this demographic confluence going on.
That's right.
You've got baby boomers who are retiring, and you've got the millennials who are moving away out of college into the workforce. And so, that's how they want to live.
They want more convenience.
Right.
We saw there were many communities that were zoning for minimum 1 acre lots. In fact, one mayor said in private at one point, we want to create a community where neither my parents nor my kids can live. And I think that's a minority view. The fact is that ordinances have changed drastically across the Wasatch Front, allowing more flexibility to respond to the market. And let me give you just one fact and then we'll move on. We projected in the mid-90s a trend for land consumption in the 10-county Wasatch Front area. The projection at the time was that by 2020, we would develop 700 square miles of land. We've put in place the quality growth strategy, various things have happened. Last year, we looked at that trend again and projected that by 2020, we'll develop 500 square miles of land. 200 fewer square miles developed. Now think about what that means for agriculture, for land preservation, for costs, not having to build roads and infrastructure, pipelines, etc., air quality. So we've seen some progress, and I think we can build on that.
I wanted to go through some of the details in the plan. Let's talk about transportation. Let's start there. Andrew, what do we look like in that sense by 2050, transportation-wise?
Transportation is essential to not just how people get around, but it's essential to how we can live. If you don't have the option to take transit or ride your bike, then of course you're going to drive everywhere, right? And the way that we have designed our communities is for this traditional American dream, which is a single-family detached home with a 2 or even a 3-car garage if you're doing great, and then you drive everywhere, and that is okay. But that is, as Alan mentioned, the predominant form of development over the last 50 to 60 years in America. But recognizing these trends that we have in our region, the growth that's coming, and the fact that we have a constrained area with the mountains and the lakes, constraining the growth. Over the past 15 years, many people in this community, many of you have been involved in this, have said, we need to think differently. And so we started on a path of investing in transit. We've had the greatest highest per capita investment in mass transit of any region in the country over the past 10 to 15 years. Now, some people say, well, why are we doing that? Why are we spending all this money on transit? Sometimes I see the bus go by and it's empty, or the train goes by and it's empty. But at rush hour, the trains and buses are full. Just like, by the way, the roads are full at rush hour and they're empty the rest of the time. Okay? So we've been thinking ahead. But what's smart about that, as we look ahead to 2050, 2040, 2050, is as the growth that is coming happens, we have already put in place a transportation network, at least the spine of a transportation network, to absorb more of that growth. It was smart, it was forward-thinking, and I'm not taking any credit for that. That was put in place well before we got here. As we continue to look out ahead into the future for transportation, we can't say, we're done. Let's rest on our laurels, right? We have a great spine of a transit system. We have to have adequate bus service that feeds into that spine, neighborhood and local bus service, but that is serving that. But then, and I'm sure you're going to go on from transportation here, it's not just about transportation. You have to think about transportation in conjunction with land use, right? Where is new development going to occur for jobs, for homes, and how do you integrate transportation and land use together to be as efficient as possible?
So, I guess the question is, let me go to land. This is, did I get this right? Only 37,000 vacant acres left in the Salt Lake Valley?
That's probably about right.
13,000 vacant acres left in Davis County. So where do they end up? Where do you put them? And where are these communities developing? I mean, where do you envision
There are
this
probably
happening?
some different views of what development patterns will come about. Part of it can be directed by through the transportation system. One of the things that we're looking at is if you put people just at 8 dwelling units per acre, it's not terribly dense. But if you developed that reasonable density,
Like the avenues, that would like akin to the
something
avenues,
like that.
right? Yeah.
If you did that around each of our transit stops, you could put 1 million people within half a mile of transit. And, you know, most of these transit developments are 60, 70, 80 people or units per acre. So that's part of it. But as we look at land going forward, we've been doing some market studies. Trying to figure out what are the patterns in terms of demographics, economics, and where will that drive growth. And certainly we're going to be filling in the developed areas. But I think we'll probably see a lot of growth down in Utah County on the west side of the lake, which creates its own real challenge.
Are we going to see more roads?
Well, certainly. There will be more roads. We hope there will be more transit as well.
Yeah, there are some people who say, no more roads, no new development for housing. Do everything through infill and redevelopment. Personally, I don't think that's feasible. It's not realistic given the incredible, doubling of our population by 2050. We have to be effective in having a multitude of strategies. So when we are doing call it a greenfield development, that will happen, there are strategies to take Daybreak, right? Everybody's familiar with the Daybreak community. And that area was designed in a way that it is relatively smaller lots, but it's still predominantly single-family homes. But it was planned with transportation in mind from the very beginning, right? 2 transit stops going into Daybreak, connected streets to make it much more walkable. So how we develop new areas, how our communities are designed in areas that is new is really important, in addition to infill and redevelopment that's happening in our areas that are already developed.
One of the things, by 2050, every driver could face 2 to 4 times the delays that they're seeing today. Is that just what's going to happen?
Well, not necessarily. We can expect more delays. I think that's almost inevitable. Put more people in a constrained area and there will be more delays. Now, we're spoiled out there. I think there was a study that came out about 5 years ago that said we've got the easiest commute in the country. Those of us stuck in it may not think so, but those that visit from outside think that we've got it pretty good. We can't say, okay, we're comfortable, we're done. And that means that we have to have a robust, diverse transportation system. Part of it's going to be more roads. Part of it is going to be locating uses closer together so that people don't need to travel as far. And certainly the build out of our transit system.
Where are these roads? Where are these roads going to go? These new roads?
I'm not sure that all of that's figured out.
Well, without getting into the details of exactly where the new roads are going to go, I will just reference, and I couldn't let an opportunity like this go by without mentioning that Utah has a unified transportation plan that looks out ahead to 2040. Okay, and it is the most balanced transportation plan that our state has ever had. And I say state, it's not just the Wasatch Front. Okay, it is a plan that looks at roads, state roads and local roads, transit, and increasingly active transportation, biking and walking. And it looks at new facilities, but it also looks crucially at maintaining the infrastructure that we have. And that plan has been developed in cooperation with folks all over the state, and we're actually the only state in the country that has one transportation plan, multimodal for the whole state. And it is designed to be, to accommodate the issues of growth and land use that we have. So if anybody wants any of the details on what the facilities are, talk to me afterwards or go online and look for the plan.
I should mention, by the way, those of you who want to talk to these gentlemen, they're going to stick around a little bit after if you have particular questions, pointed questions.
But before you go on, let me just say, I've been involved in regional issues for a long time, working on these things. One of the best decisions I ever made was when I sat on the hiring committee for the executive director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you.
No, but it's true. We've got
One of the findings we know, Utah's going to need to generate more power, obviously. We're facing decisions about transmission corridors, maintaining infrastructure, and this big question, of course, of whether we ease reliance on fossil fuels. What does our energy picture, what could it, what should it look like in the future?
Yeah, certainly there's going to be more energy demand, and we've got to look at the supply side as well as the demand side. Demand side, we're just about to release an energy efficiency and conservation plan for the state. It's been developed with experts around the state, looking at industry, at transportation, housing, etc. So we've certainly got to be much more efficient with what we do. As we look at developing the supply side, the state energy plan is an all-the-above plan. Certainly there's a fossil element, but that's got to be reduced over time. We're not to a point yet where we can rely on renewables, but we've got to aggressively pursue them. And in fact,
Are we?
Yeah, half of the Office of Energy Development in the state is people focused exclusively on energy efficiency and renewables. You've probably seen announcements of a number of new projects that are coming in. Largest solar project we've ever seen, new wind projects, etc. There are challenges there. We've got challenges with transmission. Where do you put these facilities? How do you get the power where it needs to be? Trying to get lines across public lands is well nigh impossible. But I spent the last 2 days at a Western Governors Association meeting as we were talking about how we can come together and identify the corridors for transmission lines to make it easier to get the renewables in. So each source of power has its challenges, and but I think what we can say is that over time we need to be moving toward cleaner and more abundant.
Where do you want to be for 2050 in terms of renewables? What's how would the equation work out if you had your druthers?
I'm not sure there's a specific number, but we're probably at less than 2% now. Certainly it's got to get up. I hesitate to give a number, but it's got to be significant, 20 plus.
20 plus?
You said that. I know, right?
Don't quote me, right? What do you think? You want to say anything about the energy picture?
Sounds good.
Okay, big question, I think, for a lot of people, obviously, is if there are going to be more roads, and there's going to be 2.5 million people, what does our air quality look like, and what are we doing about that? What's the air quality question?
You want to start on that, and I'll pick up on transportation? I gotta go.
We've got an air quality issue here. There's no question about it. We all recognize that. The good news is that we've seen significant progress. And I think you've all seen that, just as an example, in Salt Lake County between 2002 and 2011, total emissions have gone from 409,000 tons to 217,000 tons. So we've almost cut our emissions in half despite the growth, despite increase in vehicle miles traveled. But we're facing the headwinds of this growth we've talked about. So what do we do going forward? We've got a plan that is in place now that got approved at the end of the year to reduce emissions by 100 tons per day by 2019. That's going to help us continue that positive trend. But then you start to see it creep up because of growth. So there are more things we have to do. Every sector has to be part of the solution. The biggest contributor right now is our vehicles. And you heard the governor and the state of the state call on an accelerated process to get to Tier 3 cars and fuels. This is the next generation of cars and fuels, essentially bringing the California standards here. That's projected to reduce emissions by up to 80% below the cleanest cars today. So that can make a significant difference as well. So we're looking at that, but our housing, our buildings, and our homes contribute about a third. So we're going to have to look at new standards for building codes, for energy efficiency, energy conservation.
Let me just pick up on that for a moment. I'm optimistic about what's going to happen on air quality, in part because our automobile fleet is getting so much cleaner. That's going to help. But I think we've all witnessed, this has been an issue that's been important and been on the minds probably of everybody in this room for several years. But I think in no small part due to the great work of people like Representative Aaron and others, and Alan, there is a real community consensus that has developed around air quality that we must do something about this, okay? And when I say community, I include the business community in that. And we know, that for companies who are thinking about locating in Utah or thinking about staying and expanding here, air quality matters, okay? Like, it matters to our quality of life. So there's a lot of energy around this to do something. Now, one of the things that's great, I think you have a good strategy when you see if on a whole variety of metrics does your strategy move in the right direction. Okay, so this notion of Wasatch Towards 2040, which at its heart says we're going to create opportunities for more growth to occur in centers that are served, have multiple housing and transportation choices where people can choose to walk or bike or take shorter car trips. That basic strategy over the long term is huge for air quality, right? If we have people that aren't driving as far, don't have to drive as far, if they're able to have the option to live in centers and then take transit or bike or walk, that too, over the long term, is one of the most effective strategies that we can utilize to drive down emissions over time.
I think there's a dispute among those who are advocates for clean air about the proportion of pollution caused by industry, or certainly the potency of that. What is it, 11%? Is that the basic?
It varies year to year.
It varies from year to year, but generally that sense that. So I guess part of the question is, is the state going to have to consider imposing stronger restrictions on polluting industries?
Of course. Let me give you a little sense. The refineries are a major polluter, right? They're about 2 to 3% of the overall contribution, which is significant. Over the last 6 years, they've spent $1 billion on air pollution control equipment and cleaner fuels. That's $1 billion in 6 years. Now with this new plan that we've put out, we're requiring all major industry to install what's called best available control technology. It's a term in the Clean Air Act, meaning it has to meet high stringent standards. And they're going to have to put in roughly 250, 300 million more over the next couple of years. Now we're asking them to develop Tier 3 fuels, which is another few $100 million. All industry has to contribute. There's no question about it. We're not going to solve the problem long term unless we're addressing industry, area sources, mobile sources, and our day-to-day lives. So going forward, there's no question that we'll see a continuing ratcheting down of technological fixes, regulation, and we hope air quality improvement.
So just really quickly on air quality, because I know that it matters to everybody. Sometimes people feel like, I think they say, what can I do? And there's a lot of strategies, and there's a lot of groups, a lot of community organizations working on this. But just as a plug, Breathe Utah is an organization that really works across the spectrum on air quality issues. And so just if you're looking for, what are strategies I can use, or how can I get involved, or where can I give my money? Breathe Utah is a terrific organization. I know there's a lot of overlap between the League and Breathe, and Debbie Sigmund and Rachel Otto and Kathy Islander are in the back here, so I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you about that as well.
Let's talk about water. It's one thing Stegner used to write about, and a lot of other people have talked about it. This is the one limiting factor, if there is anything in the West, is access to water. So where are we going to get the water for 2.5 million people?
Isn't that a good question? The governor last fall kicked off this process as part of Your Utah, Your Future to develop a 50-year water strategy for the state. So we've got people from all over the state working hard on answering some of those questions. Now, I saw a projection one time in a book I read that said there's enough water in Utah to support 19 million people. So 2.5 million is nothing, right? Well, listen, at what cost? Financially and environmentally. We also know there are issues with the distribution system. How do you get water from where it is to where it's needed? The foundation of all of this has to be conservation. We have to keep driving down our water use. And I think since the late 90s, we've cut our per capita water use by about 25%. Part of that's education. Part of it, though, is the fact that our average lot size in the Wasatch Front has gone from 1/3 of an acre to 1/4 of an acre. That's a lot in 15 years. And that's a lot of landscaping that's not being developed. So land use figures into this. There will be a need to maximize what we've currently got developed in ways that we can make it more efficient, use our existing facilities. And then lastly, and I think most are saying we're going to have some new water development as well. When we do that, we've got to do it in smart ways. That might mean expanding existing facilities rather than building new ones. It might mean aquifer storage and recovery, meaning we store the spring runoff in underground aquifers where it doesn't evaporate, doesn't get as polluted, where we can access it in times of need. We're going to have to be much more creative with technology. And there are homes, kind of demonstration homes, that use 10 to 15 gallons of water a day. Is that our future? Maybe in part. Certainly reuse is going to be part of it. We treat our water and it goes out into the natural systems. We're going to have to reuse that for landscaping and various other uses. Probably a combination of all those things.
It makes me wonder if agriculture uses 89% of water. Is that true?
It's about 80.
80% of water. That's still a lot.
That's a lot.
I suppose you're seeing this emerging movement of people who want to go back to the land and farm. And then you're seeing yet a retreat from these older generations away from it. Go to Syracuse and see those onion fields being developed, for example. What do we look like in 2040, 2050 in terms of, are we at all going to have any agricultural components left to the societies, the communities in which we live?
You look at the trends, and we would project that there will be less agricultural land. But balance that against 2.5 million people that need to eat. So we've got to make sure that we're able to provide the food. Utah's never going to be self-sufficient. We're not now, and we're not going to be in the future.
But that's an important component that we do this, that we do provide some of our own sustenance?
I think so. I think most would say it's important for culture, for economic purposes, but also, you know, if we had an earthquake, couldn't get food in, it sure be nice to have some homegrown food here.
Onions.
Yeah.
So, yes, some of the water that we need will be urban, or agriculture urban transfers. But I think we're going to have to keep some of our agriculture and use more efficient water practices in agriculture, and they all recognize that.
Let me broaden from agriculture a little bit. Sometimes development, you look at an area that is undeveloped as, well, we can spread there without drawing a distinction between area that is prime agricultural land or crucial green space that we value for recreation, or area that has historical or cultural values, right? So, as I said before, is there going to be new development? Yes, there will be. But when we do our planning, we have to be appropriately analyzing and valuing the areas that we are developing in. We call this a green infrastructure, which is a sort of broad term for capturing all of these areas that are not now developed. And we have to be thinking just as much about preserving areas that are not developed now, valuing them, thinking about which of the areas are ripe for development and which ones should be preserved. Just as much energy on that as we are thinking about how we redevelop our areas that are already developed now.
And just one thought on that. Realtors tell me that the value created in properties adjacent to agriculture is significant. There's a bonus on the cost of those properties being adjacent to agriculture, more than by golf courses and many other amenities. So maybe there are ways that we can capture some of that value and use it to preserve these key lands. Because if you talk about our necessary, fundamental, valuable natural resources, water, air, etc., agricultural land, good soils has to be among those. So we ought to be investing in ways that we can preserve those.
So if you're going to sell your house, you should get urban chickens, and then that's going to increase the value of your house when you put it on the market. That's the strategy.
How is climate change going to change what we look like in 2040, 2050?
You go ahead. Take that one also.
You're passing the buck a lot.
No, I just want to make sure. Listen, if we're not considering climate change, we're missing the ball. We can see that there are changes underway now. As we're doing this Your Utah, Your Future process, we've got Dr. Gillis, who's the head of the Utah Climate Data Center, participating and helping us look through the most recent research that's been done. What does it mean for the future? And the projections I've seen are that if we see these warming trends, we're not going to have as much water stored in snowpack. We're going to see shorter winter seasons, maybe more precipitation overall, but it comes at different times, earlier runoff. That creates real issues as we start to think about storage. Where do you store it? How do you store it? Has implications for economic development and skiing, for our quality of life, the number of people we can support. So it has implications for air quality. The projection is we'll see more intense inversions. So certainly that's got to be a part of the planning process. And it is.
Let me ask about education. How many more students?
I don't have that number off here.
Yeah, I mean, at least twice as many, right? I mean, if our population is going to double, 2.5 million more people by 2050, that's going to have a huge impact on our educational system.
So what do you do about that? I mean, if I got this right, it's going to take something on the order of $3 billion to get Utah off the bottom of the list in terms of per people funding for education. $3 billion.
Yep. We'd have to
$6 billion to just get to the national average. Now, beyond taxes, how do you get there?
I'm glad I'm not on that committee.
I mean, but that's got to be part of the conversation.
And actually, one of the A groups is education.
In Your Utah, Your
Your
Future.
Utah, Your Future. We're starting to look at this issue. One of the things we're doing in this process is new. It hasn't been done anywhere before. Typically, when you plan, people get in silos and they look look at water, and they look at air, and they look at land and transportation. We're trying to look at the feedback loops in that process. Because one of the driving forces behind this is public cost. You're talking about education in huge numbers. Transportation has huge numbers. The water managers tell us we need $33 billion in the next 50 years to maintain what we've got and to build new stuff. We can't afford it. It'll break the bank. So one of the things that we're looking at is for efficiencies in the system. Are there ways that we can develop our infrastructure less expensively? Are there ways we can have development patterns that are less expensive?
In terms of education?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If we don't solve education, we're not going to see the growth. There's people coming here. So for education, part of that is keeping the costs of other things down so more money is available for education. And part of it is going to be innovation in our education system.
But are Utahns
the way we
and
have.
Utah leaders going to have to pay more money for education in the future? Is that
Well, it's going to continue
Yes.
to go up, no question. Right now, it's $70 million a year just to keep up with the growth.
Julie?
Yes, the answer is yes.
There's no question about it.
We're getting to the end here. I want to ask a couple of things. It seems like, how do our lives change? How are they going to have to? The average, the typical Utah, how is their life going to have to change heading in? And what does that look like?
Well, will people's lives change? Yes and no. Sort of going back to this notion we talked about before about there's no one size fits all. The way to deal with these issues that we have coming is not that everybody has to, live in a condo and have one or no cars and radically change their life. In the aggregate, these things need to happen. These changes need to happen. We have to have this trend towards more urban, dense living. We have to have trends towards driving less, at least per capita. We have to have trends towards less water utilization. So there are some things that you would think, you would hope that every Utahn is going to do. Like, are we going to have large lawn in 2050? Are we going to have large lawns that we water every day that are brilliant green? Well, that doesn't seem like a huge thing for people to cut back on, right? But again, there's no one-size-fits-all approach that's going to have to be utilized. The nice thing,
But don't you have to say to people that this is for us to maintain a certain quality of life? There's going to have to be some sacrifice made, or you're going to have to change in some way. You can't say to them, can you, that we can have it both ways?
well, it's sort of, okay? So do people have to sacrifice? Of course. Do we have to make adjustments? Of course. What I'm trying to say is this does not mean that the government or somebody else comes in and says, you must do these things, you have no choice. What we maybe haven't been doing a good enough job at yet is actually responding to market trends and demographic trends. So we know that, you mentioned this before, millennials and baby boomers have a desire in greater numbers than before to live in what you'd call a walkable community. You live in centers, you live in a walkable community, you use less energy, you use less water, you drive less, you have less emissions. But our design of our community right now, our zoning right now, is in a lot of ways is antiquated. So we have regulatory burdens or hurdles to going in the direction that we want to go in. So in a lot of ways, if we can respond to the market forces, respond to the demographic trends, we're going to go a long way to meeting a lot of the challenges. That doesn't mean we can just say, oh great, we're done. Does there need to be sacrifice? Yes. Do we need to change? Yes. But if we can think smart and plan far ahead and not let these sort of waves of issues crest over us, if we can plan far out into the future and turn the ship on these big growth questions, we're going to go a long way to addressing the issues that we're talking about.
How much of that 2.5 million is internal growth?
you know, it's changed year to year, but roughly 2/3 over time.
It's such a taboo, dicey thing to even talk about. What do you do about birth rates? That part of it. What do you do? Do you even talk about it?
What do you think?
How many of you are interested in that as a subject, right? I mean, people are like, oh, yeah. Okay, so what do you even, how do you approach that as an issue?
You know, every time we do something and talk about regional growth, planning, et cetera, and we say, here are the growth projections, there's somebody in the room that says, why don't we just stop growth? And I say, well, how in the world do you do that? You know, I'm telling you, in Utah, we're not going to get into people's lives and tell them how many kids they can have. And that's been disastrous in China, and it will be so here. If we create a quality of life that people enjoy, they're going to want to come here. But there are a few regions around the country that have been successful at limiting or even stopping growth. Detroit comes to mind. And I don't want to be too flippant about it, but the fact is, there are areas that have said, okay, let's put into place limits on building permits, et cetera. Let's limit through zoning. And that can make a difference in a community. Growth just spills into neighboring areas. So I've never seen anyone effectively limit growth on a regional basis without really destroying the quality of life. So I would say part of this process is a scenarios planning, where as we look at all of these issues, you know, if you ask people up front in the poll, they'll say, we want the best education, more money for that. We want, you know, water, more money for that. We want housing, more money for that. It doesn't work. So we're forcing people to come face to face with reality and the trade-offs that are part of the real world and say, you can't have it all. But here are some choices that you need to make. Here are the resources we have available. And by putting people in that position, it forces a prioritization that'll help elected officials prioritize where some of this money goes. And I think help all of us understand things that we need to do individually to change to accommodate. Now, I happen to be pretty sanguine about the future. I think, you know, we've seen these problems throughout our history. They may be more acute now. We've dealt with them through technology, policy, changes in behavior. I have no question that we'll continue to do that, but it's going to take a lot of understanding, education, listening, and action.
Quick final question. Is there one thing that keeps you up at night? One thing you worry about more than anything out of all this stuff?
Well, I'm worried that my kids, who are now 15 and 12, you know, we moved here, as I said, 4 years ago, and I'm worried that they're going to leave. If they want to go away to college, okay, but then I want them to come back. I at least want them to feel like, yeah, I'll really think about living in Salt Lake, you know, or in Utah. So the thing that I worry about is that. And so how is that decision going to be made? Do they think, as they look ahead to their lives, you know, Utah's a great place to live. This is, you know, it offers a lot for somebody of my generation. It offers a lot for somebody who is, you know, a young, having a young couple or a young family. It offers a lot for people who are further on in their lives or coming to retirement and empty nesters. So the big picture, the thing that I worry about is this big question of how we're going to deal with the growth. How are we going to preserve this incredible, I mean, one of the main reasons we moved here is because this unparalleled natural beauty, right? The access that we have in the outdoors, right? As we grow our population by 2.5 million, what's going to happen there? How, you know, is that resource going to be protected so that we still have it to enjoy? And if so, how are people going to live in this relatively tight space? I feel like the strategies are there. We've got a lot of them identified, and it's going to take a huge amount of collaboration. So I worry about what's going to happen, the risks of where we might end up if we don't plan smart and implement those plans. We run out of water, we run out of agricultural land, our traffic congestion doesn't just grow, but grows to the point that we're sitting in gridlock like we got away from in Chicago. But if we work together, and again, I'm optimistic about this, if we work together and make some of those tough choices individually and collectively, I feel like we're going to be able to tackle these problems and keep my kids here.
So,
This is the point in my show where the music would start playing to tell you to wrap it up.
Quick answer. What keeps me up at night is the thought of being grilled by Doug Fabrizio. Beyond that, it's the same thing. I worry about my kids, but let me, quick anecdote. Peter Calthorpe, world-renowned planner, worked in Utah a little bit, came back a few years ago and was looking at the West Bench area. And he spoke to a group of community leaders. He said, I've worked all over the world, and I found that Utah is different from any place I've been in two respects. Number one, there's a willingness to collaborate that I've never seen before. That shocks some of us that are in the battles, but it's true. And number two, he said there's a concern for the next generation that I've never seen anywhere else. And I think that's true. Not that others don't care, but it's a little heightened here. And those two things, willingness to collaborate and concern for the future, are going to get us where we need to be.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I put it on the floor because it was causing.
What do we think of our speakers today? As Doug mentioned, these men have agreed to stay around for a while to answer all the questions that Doug did not ask. So find them and I'll be happy to talk with you. First of all, let's see. We'd like to have Caitlin come forward and help us with our baskets. We're going to draw our baskets now. There she is, our lady with the red hat. Oh, any more tickets that need to come be put in the basket? Okay.